Well, after all the offseason changes for the Nashville Predators today, we asked the question, how much closer are they actually to a Stanley Cup run? Today, we're comparing their roster to the Athletics Stanley Cup Checklist. It's the checklist that they think every team needs to have a good run at a Stanley Cup. We'll see how the Predators fit in compared to some of the other teams around the NHL. That's coming up today on the Locked On Predators podcast.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day, every single day. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at ontheforecheck.com, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Ann Kimmel, and I cover the Predators for a website that will be launched this week.
Exciting stuff. I cannot wait for that little tidbit announcement to come out. It sounds like exciting stuff.
Yeah.
You're just going to be super coy about that. And
I mean, yes, it's going to be amazing.
I was hoping for something other than just, yeah.
Woo! Is that good?
That's better.
Okay.
That's somebody
it's
who's
Monday morning enthusiasm level, folks. Yeah. Like it takes us till about mid-Wednesday to ramp it fully up. But yes, super exciting.
That's like that one girl who's like having a really bad week and is like stuck on the pedal tavern with the rest of the Bachelorette group and just can't get into it.
Yeah, that's sort of a picture of me in general.
I mean, touche on that one.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk some hockey. That'll boost our spirits on a Monday morning.
Well,
I mean, yeah, it could be worse for us. We could be Coyotes fans.
Ouch.
Sorry, everybody. So if you read The Athletic, they put out something called like the Stanley Cup Checklist, and this is something they created a while back, and it's basically kind of a list of what every team should have to be really, really good at a Stanley, or like have a good chance at winning the Stanley Cup. So, if you look at what the Colorado Avalanche last year and you go through their thing, and it's like basically like 98% of the checklist was checked.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Basically the concept is, basically every team that has this, the better players you have in those spots, the better chance you have at a Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, it's a hockey recipe.
It is a hockey recipe. So, like, here's what The Athletic has. And they have 12 of these, so kind of run through it quickly with me. Elite center, elite winger, elite defenseman, elite goalie, top line center, top line winger, number one defenseman, top six forward, and then two top pair defensemen. And the caveat for this is all of these 12 players have to be a different player. So
which makes it a totally different exercise.
Yeah, so you can't be like, well, Roman Josi is your elite defenseman. He's also your number one defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
Like the entire, I guess the entire point of this is that like they're supposed to, like you're basically like supposed to have an elite defenseman and then also like a quality number one defenseman. You're basically supposed to have an elite center, but then like another like top line quality center on your second line, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it shows the depth that you've got to have if you're going to put together a team like the Colorado Avalanche from last year, because looking at theirs, wow.
Yeah. So first off, let's define which Preds are where on this. And because the first one's a little tricky. The first one, elite center, for Colorado is Nathan MacKinnon, obviously. For the Preds, like that, I mean, is that Mikhail Greenland? Is he the elite center?
I struggled with this because
Matt Duchene count? since he's technically the center. But
I wondered about that. Like, hey, where do these two land? I feel like Matt Duchene matches up better in that role, but if you really look at the way that the top line played, Mikhail Greenland centered that line a majority of the time.
Yeah.
But then you look at comparing statistics of Mikhail Greenland with Nathan MacKinnon, and you really want to just put Matt Duchene in there so it's not quite so far apart. But for me, I settled on Mikhail Greenland just because I felt like, practically speaking, that was the role that he filled.
I mean, but that's also like, I mean, they feel like that kind of leaves the Preds at a disadvantage compared to some of these other teams, because I like Mikhail Greenland. I think he's one of
Love him.
underrated players on the team compared to like a Nathan MacKinnon. Ooh, that's like already starting the Preds on a bad note. And if it was Matt Duchene, that's a different story.
I would agree.
So you get to the next one, and the next one is elite winger. Obviously, that's Filip Forsberg.
Yes.
If you're the Nashville Predators. But, if it's Greenland and Forsberg, there's, maybe something different. If it's Duchene and Forsberg, that's a pretty good top two.
Yeah. It looks, it weighs differently if you have Duchene as the top line set, or as you have Duchene as the elite center. It just weighs a little differently, statistically speaking, and just offensive punch, all of that kind of stuff. It weighs differently. Duchene and Forsberg are huge. They're a huge duo. They are an elite duo in the NHL. Mikhail Greenland, and I agree with you, one of the best players on the roster, quietly one of the most important players on the roster, but is he elite?
Yeah. Well, and there's more to this that, like, maybe you put Mikhail Greenland into, but I think let's look at it just from having forwards. And if the Predators have two elite forwards, that keeps them at least on track. Now, are Forsberg and Duchene as good as Nathan MacKinnon and Mikko Rantanen? MacKinnon, maybe not. Rantanen, yeah. I mean, that's comparable at least to, what Filip Forsberg did this year. So
yes. Yeah. Both of them had more goals than Rantanen this season. So I do feel like, they match up well there. Nathan MacKinnon, kind of a little bit different beast. But I also wonder, as we're talking about Forsberg and Duchene, do you feel like they're both going to have seasons similar to the season that they had last year?
Well, they don't have a choice, because if they don't, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if they don't, then the Preds are in absolutely serious trouble,
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be the $1 million question throughout the season is, look, Matt Duchene, now he's had seasons, not as good before, but definitely like high mark. Filip Forsberg, this is the first time he kind of reached that elite tier. Like, he was always a very, very solid player for all those years, but this is the first year he's really kind of been in that NHL category of he's a, top 10 winger in this league. Can he keep that up, or is it just last year? That to me is going to be the $1 million question for the Nashville Predators this year, because they need that to happen.
What's interesting to me is I feel like if you polled the fan base would say it is more likely that Filip Forsberg would repeat this season than I think Matt Duchene. And I don't think that has to do with skill. I think that has to do with how this fan base operates when it comes to Matt Duchene, because regardless of how excellent the season was last season, I think he is still the question mark out of the two of them if you polled the Predators fan base, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, there's probably some bias and other stuff going on there, but it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Here's one that is not going to be a question. That's elite defenseman. Obviously, Roman Josi is in that category. For all the talk about, he's just one tone, he lost some Norris points because he's, doesn't play defense. We've seen him play defense.
I mean, come on.
We know he is a top defenseman in this league. And it's not working there. excuse me, NHL Network in their countdown put him as the number 3 best defenseman in the league right now. Which
who was ahead of him besides Cale Makar?
Victor Hedman. Yeah, we can. I mean, I get it. Like, I'm not going to have a big argument about that. Maybe.
I mean, I would, but okay.
Yeah, but I mean, but that's the thing for Nashville is Roman Josi as you have him as an elite defenseman. That puts the Predators in a better spot in that category than every other team in the NHL besides Cale Makar.
Yes.
And, even there could be some debate about that, like I'm sure there's going to be lots of comments to that comment, but you know what? They're 2 of the best defensemen in the Western Conference right now. And so having him there, the Preds have a leg up. Like, they have a defenseman that can win a playoff series.
Yes.
And that can completely take over series.
Yes. There's not a team in the NHL, with the exception of Colorado, that wouldn't give their firstborn for Roman Josi on their roster. I think, 100% elite defensemen across the league. You're not going to find anybody who wouldn't want Roman Josi.
Yeah. And then the less of the elite categories was elite goaltender. Mm-hmm. I would put Juuse Saros in there, right? Would you call Juuse Saros elite?
I would call him elite. I mean, Vezina finalist. I feel like statistically he had a really strong season. I feel like he is clutch when he needs to be clutch. I think that there is kind of a non-statistical intangible that makes a goaltender elite. And I feel like Juuse Saros has that. I feel like he is very good. He is what the Predators have to have. Look, if Colorado can win with Darcy Kemper in net, then yes, Juuse Saros is elite. He is plenty elite enough. Thank you.
Yeah, and Colorado is built differently than Nashville.
Very
Colorado
true.
is built to sustain despite their goaltending.
Correct.
Nashville is one of those teams that will get to the promised land on the back of
sure.
And so that's where Juuse Saros comes in hand, because he's the guy that can steal a series. He's the guy that will, turn things around. And, if the Predators are doing bad, he can step up and be the guy that's like, okay, well, we are going to we're going to flip this series on its head, because I'm going to make a 36 save performance. And despite being outplayed and outshot, we're going to win this game.
I'm going to keep you in it. Yeah, for sure.
And so, I think that puts him in a better category. Like, is he the best goaltender in the Western Conference? I mean, is there another goaltender that just stands out as being overtly better than Juuse Saros?
No. I mean, really, I don't, and objectively, I don't feel like there is. I agree with you. Colorado may not need one like Nashville does, but if you're looking at just goaltending skills, I think Juuse Saros is probably the best in the West, baby. Make it a t-shirt.
Based on his play from the last 2 years, I mean, I can't think of anybody overtly better. I mean, maybe Jacob Markstrom's in that category because he had statistically a slightly better season in terms of wins and shutouts and stuff like that. But no, I would argue Juuse Saros is kind of the best goaltender in the Western Conference right now.
Yep.
So you have, so already, as we're about to hit our first break on this, you have an elite defenseman who's better than everybody in the West except maybe one. You have maybe the best goaltender in the West. So right there, the Predators are looking pretty good. So how will they look when we start going through these other teams and looking at, who's the top line center and all that? So let's get into that in just a second. But first, I want to take a second and talk to you guys about driving stoned. It is a big time. Marijuana is becoming more socially acceptable in the society. And whether or not you think that's a good thing or not, just make sure that when you do it, you do not drive stoned. You can wind up driving below the speed limit because, hey, no big deal, right? But the truth is your reaction times slow down, way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. So stop kidding yourself. It is never okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. Have somebody drive for you. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, get a DUI. All right, Ann. So we're going through the rest of this checklist. And the next one on this list is top line center, top line winger, and then another top line winger.
Yes.
So we've already, let's say Mikhail Greenland, because he's actually playing center, is your elite center. Your top line center would be, Ryan Johansen, which that's pretty good. That's, a number one quality center playing on your second line. And then top line winger, if that's Matt Duchene,
you're looking real good.
That's pretty good. That's probably, one of the best in that category.
Yes.
Throughout the West. So
yeah. This is a good start out of the gate for the top line section portion of our program. Ryan Johansen, he had a really good season last year, but I think that it's a little bit hard also to gauge based on last season because he really didn't have a lot to work with because most of the time he was centering Ellie Tolvanen and Luke Cunnin, and we know that they both struggled. So I think if he can perform really well, we're going to see a kind of a next level with him, especially because, the Predators have brought in Nino Niederreiter, and I feel like that's going to be kind of a good match. But I do feel like Ryan Johansen has the potential to be top line center material. The one thing, and I'm curious what your take is on it, if this is just sort of a leftover from the 2017-2018 kind of thing, is just this vibe that Ryan Johansen plays better in the postseason than in the regular season, that he just isn't the same Ryan Johansen regular season, but when it comes to postseason, it just kicks in. Do you think that's still true of Ryan Johansen, or do you think that's just leftover vibe?
He wasn't spectacular this past postseason, so
yeah.
It
was a rough.
He does have experience, I guess, being sort of the go-to playoff guy. I guess, sure.
It's been a little while.
Yeah,
it's been a little while.
Maybe if the Predators make a deep run and Ryan Johansen starts being like front and center of that deep run, then yeah, like maybe that. But hey, let's focus on the fact that he at least had a big bounce back year.
He did.
Year. And that I think is kind of what goes under the radar here a little bit. Is that sort of in the lost in the shuffle of Filip Forsberg having a big year and Matt Duchene having a big year and Roman Josi doing what he did. Sort of lost in the shuffle of that was that Ryan Johansen had a very, very good season. 63 points, his second most ever as a Predator, 26 goals, the most goals he's scored since 2015. 11 power play goals. That's, a pretty decent amount of power play goals. Yeah. So, you're looking at this team and Ryan Johansen is having a backup year. And if he's kind of like your second line center, that's pretty good.
That's not too shabby.
That's exactly what you want. That's exactly the quality you want from the guy playing on your second line. Doesn't have to be blow anybody away, but he is the guy who is, putting a decent level of second line production in there.
Yeah, he's a great playmaker. I love, like you said, he had 26 goals this season. So, he was offensively productive himself, but he's such a great playmaker. And it's going to be very interesting to me to watch this coming season because, like I said, you've got Nino Niederreiter coming in. We'll see what they do with that other second line slot. But, Ryan Johansen had a really good season with line mates who, God love them, did not have really good seasons. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Ryan Johansen's game with, Nino Niederreiter, and whether it's Phil Tomasino, whether it's Tanner Genoa, whether whoever it is that they put on that second line, if Ellie Tolvanen receives, a dispensation, I don't know. But I think it's going to be really interesting. He is one of the players whose season I think is going to be the most interesting because he performed very well under maybe not so ideal circumstances last season. So it's going to be great to see kind of what he can do. I'm hopeful for Ryan Johansen this season.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, everybody kind of craps on that second line, but then you put Ryan Johansen on that first power play unit, and he capitalized off everything else. He played great. Like, he was setting up plays, he was finishing plays, and so that goes to show you, it's like, okay, maybe the second line changes things up a little bit, and we're seeing some of that Ryan Johansen product with other, like, better players than he had as his line mates last year. Because, you don't want your two second line wingers to combine for 40 points. You want your second line winger to have you want them to have at least 40 points apiece, not 40 points combined.
Yes.
So maybe that'll change this coming year. Here's the biggest, to me, and question mark on this entire list. The other top line winger. Now they're saying this is a guy who could be like a number one winger on most NHL teams, but is, playing on the second line here. Nino Niederreiter.
Yeah.
Now, better. Now, that is a big upgrade from either Luke Kunin or Ellie Tolvanen.
For sure.
But is it enough? Like, for instance, the one on this list is Val Nichushkin, who had a big 60-point season. Is having Nino Niederreiter, who is a very good player, but is kind of a 45-point guy, is that going to be enough for the Predators to compete against some of these other teams?
Yeah, and I think that's a huge question. 100%, this is an upgrade on the second line. So the Predators have improved. They've gotten better bringing Nino in. 100%. What happens now is such a question mark because, again, who is going to also be on that line? I think Ryan Johansen with Nino is going to be a good combination for both of them. I think they play very similar. So I think that could be good. But when you look at just numbers, if you look at statistics, if you look at impact even on games, is Nino Niederreiter the same as a Valeri Nichushkin, who I really wanted in Nashville, FYI? Golly, I think, and I will say this, not just for the Nashville Predators, but I think across the league, this is probably the spot that I think is the most difficult to fill. To have that much talent in your forward lines, I think is really tricky. I don't think a ton of teams have two top line wingers that play on their second line. And I think that's part of what made Colorado so magical, is that they had that kind of elite depth. And I don't think a lot of teams do. Are the Predators better? Yeah, they're better. Are they going to be able to sort of hit that Colorado next level with Nino? I don't know.
Yeah. It feels like if the Predators really want to be strong contenders, there probably needs to be one more move.
Yes.
I think that's what people were kind of hoping would happen at some point. Now, look, it doesn't have to be Phil Kessel.
It could have been.
It could have been. But I think you look at the trade market and some of the people that are going to be available, if the Preds are in a pretty good spot at the trade deadline, you would think that would be their priority somewhere, is to get one more high, quality scoring winger who can play on your second line. It depends on who that big swing is going to be. Obviously, JT Miller is going to be the prize at some point. Vancouver is kind of, I don't know if they've officially pulled him off the market, but they said we're more likely to trade him at the deadline. I don't know if that was just posturing to, make a team really put out a good offer out there. But that's somebody the Predators should probably be in on.
Yes, for sure.
That's kind of, that's kind of the sore spot for me. Is it feel like Nino Niederreiter, big upgrade, I think fits in great on that line. I think he and Ryan Johansen are going to have a big season together. But is it enough to take down like the Colorado Avalanche? Yeah, that's that's going to be the point that I think
it's a big question.
Really put in. Yeah.
So coming up, we're going to talk about defensemen, which is a little bit more pleasant than maybe talking about two first-line wingers for the Nashville Predators, for sure. But we want to thank you for making Locked On Preds your first listen every day. If you are curious about how some of the other teams in the NHL stack up on this checklist, you're going to want to check out Locked On NHL, where you have Locked On experts from across the league coming on to give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. You can stay up to date on everything in the hockey world, including trades, how these teams are looking going into the season, who really does have an elite center. All that you can find on Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast.
So another thing on this list real quick is number one defenseman. So you have your defenseman. This is like, you're also supposed to have a defenseman that can basically be a number one defenseman on most any other NHL team.
Yes.
For Colorado, they're listed as Devontae, who had a very, very underratedly good year. Underrated almost just because he was playing with next to Cale Makar. For the Predators, is that Mattias Ekholm still?
Yeah, I think so. I really do think so. I don't know that he necessarily had the standout season last season that he had the season prior, where he was kind of the it guy when it came to the trade deadline, where everybody kind of wanted to take a look and take a swing at maybe Mattias Ekholm. He was kind of the big fish. But I do think that Mattias Ekholm could, he is, a number one defenseman for a lot of teams. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, it's so difficult because when you have Roman Josi and you kind of compare him to Mattias Ekholm, it's like apples and oranges. They're two very different defensemen in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's very hard to judge Matt Duchene, Jesus, Mattias Ekholm too.
Yes.
Because it's like, if you look at it, not this past season, but the season before, I would argue he was the best defenseman on the team that year.
Mm-hmm. In
the very shortened 2021 season. And then you look at the season before where he was kind of having issues with his defensive partner. And you look at that and you say, this is kind of a step back. And you look at last year, I would say was very inconsistent. But when Mattias Ekholm was on, he was, one of the best defensemen on the Nashville Predators and a very, very good defenseman in the Western Conference. Played a lot of minutes, made a lot of big plays.
Mm-hmm.
If he's consistent, then the answer is yes. He's very good. And very good enough to be, the number one defenseman kind of playing a different top four role.
Yes, I would agree with that. But it's tricky. And I think it's tricky too with defensemen because it's a pairing. Like, you kind of, no matter how great you are, how goes your partner sort of, that's a little bit how goes your game. So it's a little bit trickier, I think, with defensemen to gauge that.
And I think that'll be better this year.
Yes.
As we go into some of these other things. Okay. So they have two other top six forwards. I'm just kind of more curious, this is where maybe the depth starts to hurt a little bit. Because you naturally would want to put your other top six forward in there. Right now, we don't know who that is.
Right. Bless you.
Thank
Bless you. And bless the Predators.
Yes, and bless the Predators.
God bless the
Right now, we
Predators.
don't know who that other top six forward is going to be. If it's Ellie Tolvanen, maybe there's a problem there. If it's Phil Tomasino,
Interesting.
maybe that's interesting, but that maybe they promote some guy I think would be in that category no matter what, and that's Tanner Genoa.
Agreed.
Tanner Genoa, I think, is definitely kind of fits that build as, sort of guy that can maybe just middle six. Middle six is kind of how I would describe that, is he can be on the second line and be fine, be on the third line and be fine. And that's pretty quality. Like, I think if he's kind of your guy you rely on to fill in, a decent chunk of the depth scoring phenomenon, then I think the Predators are in pretty good shape with that. Now, we're going to have to, for all the questions about whether Duchene and Forsberg can repeat their seasons, that's another conversation right there, is can Tanner Genoa repeat his season? Especially because, down the stretch, not as hot as, he was at the beginning of the season. But that other top six forward role, and like that is going to be a big, big question mark.
That's a huge question mark. And I agree with you. I think Tanner Genoa definitely fits into this based on how he performed overall last season. Hopefully he will pick up this season maybe at a different place than he ended last season. But yes, that other top six forward, is it Filip Tomasino? Look, here's what I think. It could be Phil Tomasino in March or April of this season. Is it going to be Phil Tomasino in November and December of the season? I don't know. Yeah. It's a huge question mark. And I think that may be the area that is the hitch and the giddy up for the Nashville Predators this season, is where are you going to get the rest of your scoring in that sort of top six forward role? Where's it going to come from? Hopefully it can come from Phil Tomasino or, Ellie Tolvanen. Come on, we believe in you. You can do it.
If he has a backup or bounce back year, it's just, I have question marks about how John Hines kind of sees him fitting in long term. I mean, there's very much a Arvidsson vibe where it's just like you can kind of tell that, maybe this isn't the right fit, but we'll see. Like we will definitely have to see. And then the last two entries on this list are two top pair defensemen. These are, guys that play on, are depth guys, but could play on the top pair in most, NHL teams. Right. And honestly, I think there's three players that could kind of fit the mold for the Nashville Predators. We have Ryan Mcdonough, who obviously has been a number one defenseman before, a very good number one defenseman. We have Alexander Carrier, who is, one of the most underrated defensemen in the NHL this year. I think he can, maybe be a 40-point player this year, depending on who he plays with. And then you know what? For all the stuff people say about Dante Fabro, this is a guy who I think is becoming a very, very, very good piece for the Nashville Predators. He's not the two-way piece that everybody thought the Preds were going to get when they drafted him, but I think he is somebody that can kind of be on, a top pair, a second player, as like a counterpoint to somebody like Roman Josi, where Roman Josi is going in and kind of being the, the playmaker, the setup guy. And he, Dante Fabro is the guy that hangs back and kind of there's the actual defensive responsibilities.
No, I agree with that. I think Dante Fabro, he had a couple rough spots this past season, but I agree with you. I think if you're looking for a traditional stay-at-home defenseman, when you're looking at, pairing them with somebody like Roman Josi or, even Alexander Carrier, I think can be a little Josi-esque, like a little Josi Jr. when it comes to getting down and getting involved in the play and having a little bit more of an offensive zhuzh to his game. Dante Fabro is a really great pair or a really great partner for somebody like that. And he is another player whose season I think is going to be really important to the Predators. It's not all going to fall on Forsberg and Duchene. I think players like Dante Fabro are going to be really important. How he performs this season is going to steer the Predators ship, I think, almost as much as some of these bigger name players. So, yeah, I think Fabro, for being as young of a player as he is, I think he's got a tremendous upside defensively.
Yeah, and I think when you look at, the Predators' top 4 defensemen, in this case, top 5, I'm happy with it, right? Like that's
so much better.
Top 5.
Yeah. So I think the defense has made such a huge improvement going into this coming season. And I think that definitely helps the Predators get closer to being a deep Stanley Cup run team. Now, will all the other pieces fall together?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question is this combination, like this checklist, the Predators do check a lot of boxes. How many boxes do they compare or, are checked off compared to some of the other NHL teams? I would, Colorado by far is the one team that's better than them. You look at a team like Edmonton who has probably check marks boxed off. That wasn't
boxes checked off.
Boxes checked off.
Got you.
With bolder ink because you have Connor McDavid and you have Leon Draisaitl there. But, do they have more of the depth boxes checked off than Nashville? I would argue probably not, or at least at this point until some other players step up. And I'm looking around. Calgary may be the only team that would have more boxes checked right now. St. Louis maybe, but, the rest of them, it seems wide open. Like it seems like this is a very wide open thing.
Yeah. And if you look at how Colorado fit in this checklist system last season, it's lightning in a bottle to really be able to go down this checklist and say, we've got all of these components. It is lightning in a bottle. It is, we have brought in somebody who maybe has underperformed and all of a sudden they're in a situation where they are performing at the top of their game. This is lightning in a bottle. Yeah. So it's not an easy checklist to hit everything on. I think Colorado did it last season. I think the Predators are in an okay position if you go down the checklist. No. It's not horrible.
It's not horrible, and we'll have to see where it
all shakes out.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the $1 million question. We'll have to wait and see how that turns out. All right, Ann, where can the people find your work?
You can find me online on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
I'm Nick Morgan. You can find me at ontheforecheck.com. Follow me on Twitter at _NSMorgan. While you're there, follow the show at LO_Predators. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. That's going to do it for us today on the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back with all new episodes starting Wednesday.